Our third type of collection are tuples. And tuples are nearly identical to lists, except that they are immutable, meaning we can't change them. So whereas we created lists with square brackets, we create tuples with parentheses. So here I'm creating an empty tuple assigned to the variable a. Here I'm creating a tuple of three numbers that represent an RGB color, where R is 255, the green is 128, and the blue is 0. And here I'm creating a tuple in which I've stored my first name, middle initial, and last name. So how do I insert data into a tuple? Can I append like I did with the list? Well, let's see what happens. I get an attribute error. Tuple has no attribute append. This was kind of a trick question. Demonstration, just because just up here I said lists are immutable. Once I've defined my name as consisting of Brian E. Chapman, I can't change that tuple. This becomes valuable in like functional programming paradigms, which we might talk about later in the semester, where you want to have your program consist as much as possible of objects that can't be modified by the program. And that makes it easier to assess the, analyze the program and allows you to make it useful for parallelization and topics like that. So tuples, how do we access data? Just like we did with a list. We index into it with square brackets and provide the index value that we want. So there I return my first name. Like I said, of course, we can't modify a tuple. Just beating this into your brain. But what I can do, so you see, I didn't append can I do this to the tuple A. I appended can I do this to the last element of A, which is a list. So I could do this. All right. Python has, it's not in the default namespace, so it's not in the set of functions and things that Python knows right when you start it up. But there's a package called collections, and we'll use a variety of things from collections throughout the class that defines a named tuple. The named tuple has the advantage that I can assign a name to the particular element of the tuple, which can make it a little more user-friendly to work with. It I can have like a first name and a last name and not have to remember 0, 1, 2, etc. So here I've created so I've imported from collections, and from collections I'm using the name tuple, and I'm calling this a T item. And this goes to some of the language processing tools that I've written. And a name tuple that I'm going to call a C item. And then I say what is in that tuple. So in this case, that tuple consists of what I'm going to call a C item, an attribute that I'm going to call span, an attribute that I'm going to call scope, an attribute that I'm going to call found phrase, context category, and ID. Now the name tuple that I call a C item consists of a literal, category, RE for regular expression, and rule. Now these are just names. They're not specifying anything about what value I can assign to span or category or rule. They're just names that I can use to access the elements that I store in a tuple. So here I'm creating a name tuple for a patient name, and the patient name is going to consist of a first, last, middle, and a suffix. Okay, so now once that I've defined them, then I can create an entity called my name, which is an instance of patient name, and I've put in it Brian Chapman E with PhD, and I can print that out, and it's telling me that what first is, what last is, etc. I can still use an index to extract the first element which was the patient, which was first. Or I can refer to it with this dot notation for the name that I associated with that element, in this case, last. So I'm using indexing to get Brian, and I'm using the name to get the last name. So these are sensible values for names. Like I said, this says nothing about what type of attributes values they can be. So I can just as well create a patient name that consists of a number, a tuple, a string, and a list, and Python's going to be perfectly happy. Now I can mix up the order in which I assign things. Let's see, I don't think I do that here. But here I do, where instead of providing it first name, last name, middle, as long as I'm telling it that this is the last name and this is the first name, then Python doesn't care about the order that I'm specifying. If I don't provide the names, then it's going to assume the order that I defined them when I created the patient name tuple. Okay, so that's a mistake in the order. So I'm going to create an element for our dog. And so I can use, in this case, I'm saying Helios Chapman without any names associated with it. And so Python's going to associate Helios with the 0th or first, Chapman with the last, and then it's taking the suffix in middle and using the values that I assigned to it. And that all works out dandy. So there's some flexibility in how we can assign the values when we're creating the patient name.